Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day four. I am in communication with Dr. Molefe. He's having some technical issues, but he'll be joining us in the next minute or so. All right, welcome everyone to the last day of the African Philosophy Summer School. Today we are going to be having uh, Dr. Motamai Molefe, and he's going to be speaking to us on the topic ethics, personhood, and Afro-communitarian values. So, Professor Molefe, if you can hear me, the floor is open for you.
Thank you, Dr. Arabia, for the floor. Can I just be given a minute? I want to try to connect to stream.
Okay.
I think I'm struggling a bit here, but I think I will start anyway. Is it showing on your side?
No, it's not.
Is it showing?
No, it's showing now.
Okay. Let's get into it. The aim is to really give a very rough outline of how the idea of personhood can inform a moral theory. There are many ways in which it can inform a theory. I'm going to just highlight two of those that I like. Two of those that I like. I wish I can use a different verb, but let me use that one now because it does not expose me to philosophical objections that I don't think I'll have intellectual resources to respond to. So I'm going to start by giving you a rough sense of the concept of personhood. In fact, more carefully, I should have said concepts. I should have said concepts of personhood rather than a concept to suggest that it's singular. The second thing I'm going to do is just to give you one way to structure moral theory. And the third thing I'm going to do is to put this particular framing of a moral theory into a particular moral structure. One way of thinking about moral theorization, a structure called moral perfectionism, or sometimes it is called self-realization approach to. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just share with you one essential feature of it, and then discuss some objections, and then open up for questions and engagement. I hope that's clear. Let's get on top of it. When we discuss the concept of a person, like I did on Tuesday, we can distinguish four of those. Can discuss a few of those. We can just be referring to the fact of being a human being, or we could be discussing the idea of personal identity. One thing to note about 1 and 2 is that they are ontological concept of a person. In other words, they're descriptive accounts of things, or descriptive accounts, or they're descriptive accounts. On the one hand, the descriptive account of a particular species of things in the world. So in other words, if you take a group of things that we refer to as human beings, they form a particular ontological class. And when you zoom close into them, you can be able to descriptively, identify features that characterize them. Because they've got a body, they've got a mind, they've got a soul, or if you follow social Darwinism, you can say, no, these are just entirely material beings, right? So depending on which theory of human nature you take seriously. So that's the idea of, but at the basic of it, it's just the idea of a human being. Personal identities are theories of socialization, if you want to think of that way. But in philosophy, this question is posed differently. If you have a person at time 1 and person at time, if you have a subject at time 1 and a subject at time 2, and we think this is the same subject, how do you account for that? That you remain the same thing over time. How do you account for that? How do you account for that? Some people posit soul, some people posit memory, some people posit consciousness, but all of those would be account of personal identity in philosophy. In African thinking, that question is answered by appeal to community and social relationships. What constitutes your identity over time and the kind of a thing that you are, it's your involvement in relationship. That's what accounts for your emergence and continuance of personal identity. Those are two distinct ontological senses that we could distinguish. And within this idea of personal identity, cultural identity, and all of those would fall under that. And then there's another sense of personhood, which we describe it as moral status. This is common in Western bioethical literature, where the debate, for example, about abortion will be the debate about whether fetuses have moral personhood. Right? The debate is not whether they're human or not. The debate is different. Do they have ontological features that qualifies them for moral personhood? And for example, in a Kantian theory, moral personhood is a function of having rationality. The question is that, do fetuses have rationality? If they don't have rationality, therefore they're not moral persons, and therefore abortion is permissible. And someone said, no, they may not have morality, but they have a potential for it, and therefore they've got partial moral status. Some theories will say, no, you need to have consciousness. You need to have a concept of self. You need to have a self-concept. If you don't have that, then you don't have moral status. So there's that idea where certain ontological features are thought crucial to define moral personhood. And this concept of moral personhood plays an important role in bioethical debates, stemming from beginning of life issues to the end of life issues. That's another important concept of personhood. Features in African philosophy, but I don't think people have paid enough attention to it. And this is an important concept for those who really are interested in bioethics to really pay attention to. Some interesting people are working on this idea. It's people like Thaddeus Metz, people like who's our brother who will not be presenting today, Owusu Advance, Ature, Caesar Ature has done some brilliant work in that regard. These are people who've contributed in that regard. I've also thrown in a few things in relation to this concept. So of moral status in African philosophy. And then the last concept of personhood is the idea of virtue excellence. This idea, when we look at it, you can say of a human being, say this one is not a person. And this one is an animal. When you make those kinds of assertions, these are normative and evaluative assertions. And the specific target of their evaluation is the conduct of the agent. So when you say, hey, this one is not a person, you are berating the quality of their performance or deportment or quality. So you can see that the moral status concept and the concept of morals of virtue, those normative concepts have got different targets of evaluation. Moral status, the target of moral status is whether you possess the irrelevant ontological capacity. If the relevant ontological capacity is rationality, if you don't have rationality, then you're not a person. It's not about whether you use it or not, just about that. If, for example, according to Matanasbaum, the relevant ontological capacity is basic capabilities. If you don't have basic capabilities, then you don't have moral status. If according then to utilitarianism, the ontological feature is sentiency. If you don't have sentiency, then you don't have moral status. Right? If according to Regan, is being a subject of a life, right? Subject of a life, or subjecthood is a moral status. Then if you can't be a subject of particular experiences, then you lack moral status. So all of those theories are theories that specify a particular ontological feature or capacity or property as a basis for value. If you've got that feature, then you've got value. If you don't have it, then you don't have value. This concept is important because it helps us to identify who belongs to the moral community or even political community. And those who belong in the moral community are those that we owe duties to protect and duties to empower, right? Duties to protect and to empower. And then in terms of virtue, the target of this normative concept is conduct. If your conduct is good, if your habits and dispositions are characterized by virtue excellence, then you are a person in this sense. So the focus here is what you do with yourself. So on 3 is the kind of a thing that you are. You possess relevant properties, then you've got value. And because of that value, you must respect you. There's particular ways we may not treat you. In relation to 4, relative to how you conduct yourself, we must respect you. That gives you reputation and praise in the community. We don't achieve 3, you simply have to present with the relevant ontology. We achieve 4, you use the ontologies positively, then you become virtuous. These are 4 distinct concepts of personhood, right? And you can see that they have different philosophical profiles, right? On the first one, you want to just investigate the phenomena called human. You want to give an ontological account of it. On the second one, we want to know how human beings are socialized so that they are able to function in the world. In terms of 3, you want to know what things in the world we can pick out as morally important, deserving our recognition and respect. In terms of 4, you want to see what things in the world excel morally. 4 different concepts of a person, and they've got different philosophical profiles. This idea, these 4 distinct concepts of personhood, it's someone's PhD, it's someone's career. You can just spend your entire career looking at these concepts. That's what I'm trying to waste my life doing. Now, let's get into moral theory. I don't have time to get into the nitty-gritties of what a moral theory is. I hope one day I'll be able to do so. But for now, I want to share with you two ways, very rough, but hopefully meaningful, to give you a sense of how to think of moral theory. And for this particular theory, I draw it from one of the influential thinkers who's based in the US, I think originally from Nigeria, Prof. Polycarp Ikunube. Prof. Polycarp Ikunube has written extensively on personhood. So Ikunube, in constructing his account of moral theory, he relies on 1 and on 4. 1 and on 4. You see what's happening here? He relies on 1 and on 4. And he relies on 1 and on 4. In relation to 1 refers to those capacities that we must actualize to be able to achieve 4. Whatever that capacity might be, says those capacities of human nature, ontological capacities, at best, they've got instrumental value, right? And then the achievement of a virtue or excellence or perfection has got intrinsic value. Now, note the distinction between these two concepts. Distinction between instrumental and intrinsic value. Instrumental value is value associated with the thing relative to the outcomes or consequences it can bring about. So, for example, a phone has instrumental value so long as it can be used to make calls and to connect, to communicate. Money is a perfect example of a thing that has got instrumental value. Money is useful insofar as it can facilitate economic transactions. So it's got instrumental value. So according to Ikunube, the capacities that we have, whether you're rationality, whether they're emotional, at best, they have instrumental value. Their function is to help, the aim of the agent is to convert these so that they become an embodiment of virtue. It is when they embody virtue that we can associate them with intrinsic value, So on this theory, you've got two features, right? The one feature is the capacities, which I think it's the first notion of a person. The first notion of a person, a human being, comes with these capacities. When you perfect these capacities, then you achieve 4. You achieve 4. Right? So what's also interesting about Ikunube, he believes that the achievement of 4 is equivalent to 3, which I think is very problematic. But for now, let's leave that. Just wanted to give you one way to interpret Ubuntu. And you can see that it involves how we think about 1 and how we think about 4. So there's a relationship between 1 and between 1 and 4. The ontological concept of being human is foundational for the possibility of a 4. And that foundational relationship practically is explained in the following way. You develop the capacities of your nature, which have instrumental value. When you develop them, then you achieve what we've described here as 2. You achieve 4. Then you are virtuous, you are excellent, or you've achieved perfection. Another way to structure this theory is proposed by Molefe. In this particular view, Molefe sees a relationship also between 1 and 4, But according to Molefe, 1, the capacities that we have intrinsic value. Not all of them. Certain of those capacities have got intrinsic value. Right? When we develop those capacities, we then achieve virtue. We achieve virtue. So you've got 2 ways to interpret the same phenomenon of personhood, right? 1, how to relate with the capacities of our nature. We think of them to have intrinsic value. That's to have instrumental value. That's Ikunube. And this is important. You can trace it from the debate between Menkiti and Jeje. Menkiti's submission was that capacities have no value at all. In fact, that was his suggestion. The minimalist view that assigns value relative to capacities is wrong because capacities have no value. Capacities only have value when they are developed, what he calls the maximalist view. So Ikunube comes very closely to capturing Menkiti's view, which I think both of them are wrong. But that's not the subject now, whether they're right or wrong. And then on Mlefe's account, capacities have got intrinsic value, right? But what we achieve, the acquisition of virtue, has what we call extrinsic value. Now, note the distinction here. Intrinsic value, well, I didn't explain the concept of intrinsic value. The idea of intrinsic value, the idea of intrinsicality denotes the idea of the location of the value, that this value is located internal to the object itself. The source of this value is inherent in the object itself, right? In other words, you can distinguish things in terms of where value is located in relation to them, right? So money has got an extrinsic value because the value of money is not in money itself, but in what money can do in the market. So the value of money is in the market, right? That is why currencies can become weak or strong, because their value is not in them. In fact, their value is in the gold. For example, some economies are connected to gold. If they're connected to gold, when value loses value, money loses value. So the value of gold, the value of money is extrinsic to it. It's not located in it. But when you say something has got intrinsic value, you say the value itself is located in the thing itself. One perfect example of this is beauty. Many of us, when we value beauty, we don't value it for any other thing. We value it for itself. And we think that the value of beauty is in beauty itself, not anywhere else. It's just in beauty itself, right? In that sense, beauty is intrinsically valuable, right? Because the value of beauty is in beauty itself. It could have other contributory roles, right? It could make other people happy and all of that, but that's besides the point. The point is that when you admire and appreciate a beautiful landscape, the value of the beauty is in the landscape itself, right? It's intrinsic in the landscape itself, right? So that's the distinction here. So when we say here, capacities are intrinsically valuable, say in and of themselves, before you even do anything with them, before you even develop them, at least some distinctive features of human nature are valuable. So you can see the difference here, very radical. And Jeche, in moderate communitarianism, this is the view he wants to make, that there are certain features of human nature, what he calls internal features, that are intrinsically valuable. He wrongly identifies autonomy as such a feature. But the point is not the debate is not which feature is correct. The point is that at least their theorization of ethics and values, that thinks that possession of certain internal features, those features themselves are intrinsically valuable. So note the distinction between how Menkiti, Ikunubu on the one hand, Molefe and Jeche approach this question of values, that when you want to think of personhood, be clear about which concept of personhood you're using, and also be clear about the interaction between the two, the capacities and what you achieve, right? I hope I'm not confusing anyone. I'm feeling a bit confused myself. But now let's properly put this into a particular frame to think of morality, right? There are different ways to frame morality, but one salient way, particularly when you read literature on personhood and literature on Ubuntu, and also when you read literature on this idea of vitality, there's something that really strikes the reader there, that African ethics seems to have a deep teleological orientation. The idea that things in the world have to reach a particular level of perfection. Things in the world have to evolve, have to engage in a moral process of evolution, and the goal is that things must fulfill a particular purpose, and that purpose relates to the thing itself perfecting itself, right? So in moral theories that expect, for example, human beings as moral agents to perfect some aspect of their human nature, those theories are called perfectionist theory. Here you want to distinguish between two kinds of perfectionism. There's political perfectionism, there's moral perfectionism. These are two different thinking. Moral perfectionism is a theory about morality revolving around human beings perfecting their nature, right? Those are moral perfectionist theories. Political perfectionism is a theory about the state in relation to the function or the role of the state. Perfectionist theories are theories, unlike liberal theories, that believe that the state has a duty to achieve particular goals. The state, in other words, if you put it in the Rawlsian terms, the state is committed to a particular comprehensive doctrine. And that doctrine has got a particular view about human nature. And the function of the state is to assist human beings to achieve that goal. Right? Something like Marxism is characterized by this kind of perfectionism, right? Characterized by this particular perfectionism. But if you look into libertarianism or some versions of egalitarianism, so the state is just a watchman. It creates a space for individuals to pursue their various conception of what it means to be human. It holds no theory of a conception of life. A perfectionist political theories hold a theory of a conception of life. But I'm emphasizing the distinction between moral perfectionism and political perfectionism. So moral perfectionism are those theories that says agents have to realize themselves, right? And the one that we are really interested in here takes a very specific form, what we might call a self-realization approach, that the agent has a duty to realize itself, in other words, to become the best version of itself. And Menkiti, I think, hints at this interpretation of African ethics. On 1984, 172 says, thus, it is not enough to have before us the biological organism, referring to a human being, with whatever rudimentary psychological characteristics as are seen attaching to it, what we've been referring to as ontological capacities. We must also conceive of this organism as going through a long process of social and ritual transformation until it achieves, acquires, ends the full complement of excellencies seen as truly definitive of a man. Right? So you begin off as a biological organism, right? But your goal is to engage in social moral transformation, so that, and the consequence, if that transformation is successful, is that you are going to have full complement of excellencies. And the possession of full complement of excellencies is what we call personhood in terms of four. Right? So you start off with the rudimentary psychological characteristics, rationality, memory, consciousness, and all of that. But on Menkiti's view, these have got no value at all. At least, at best, they've got instrumental value. And when these are what I call raw capacities are developed, then you have the emergence of a person. Note, I'm saying person, I'm not saying a human being. Already you are a human being since you are a biological organism, but the goal is to achieve personhood, what he gives as full complement of excellencies, not excellencies, right? What we think of as virtues, right? What we think as character development or character perfection, right? And during this long process of attainment, the community plays a vital role as a catalyst and a prescriber of norms, right? I'm not going to get into that. But get the point here. The idea is that moral perfectionism, the idea that an individual has to develop himself. This idea is also called moral perfectionism. Some people interpret it as autocentrism, or you can think of it merely as self-development approach to morality, right? So one interesting way to interpret the idea of personhood is as a self-development theory, that the agent has a duty to develop themselves. And what is it that they're exactly developing? They're developing their character. In other words, there are certain distinctive features of our nature that we need to develop so that they are decorated, and we don't decorate it here carelessly, they're decorated with a good character, good disposition, right? And then you have excellencies, and then you are morally perfect. So when we say we're morally perfect, we mean it in that sense, right? So you've got two theories of moral perfection. You've got the Menkiti way of thinking about it, the moral perfection, the perfection of capacities. Capacities themselves have instrumental value. When you perfect them, they've got what you might, inverted commas, intrinsic value. You've perfected yourself. You are now a person. But Molefo says, no, the very capacities themselves have got value, but you can add another dimension of value to them, the intrinsic value, by being virtuous, right? So yeah, that's moral theory. Let me just clarify something important that sometimes could render a perfectionist theory unattractive. If you do moral philosophy and you study the debate between consequentialism and deontological accounts, you'll know that there's a difference between honoring a value and promoting a value. honoring a value, there are two ways to relate to the value, right? So the value that is posited by personhood is just the value of perfection or being of excellency. Right? The question is, how do you relate to that value? How must we relate to that value? There are two possible ways to relate to that value. That could be a value that we promote, or that could be a value that we honor. These are two distinct attitudes towards how to relate with a value. Consequentialist accounts tend to promote a value. Promoting a value involves ensuring that there is much of that value as possible in the world. Part of that is not opposed to increasing that value by violating it. Let me repeat that. Promoting a value involves making sure that there's much of it in the world. And one way to think of making sure that there's much value in the world, we can say these accounts tend to maximize the value. They maximize the value. And because they maximize the value, they are described as promoting a value. And then on the other hand, you've got theories that honor a value. Theories that honor a value, they value the single instance of this particular value, even it means, I don't know how to say this, even it means, okay, maybe an example will help. Maybe an example between these two will help. Let me give you an example of on promoting a value. If you take the value of honesty as a value that you must promote, part of what is involved in promoting a value, part of what is involved in promoting a value is make sure that there is much of it in the world as possible. That even involves, by cheating to my wife, there'll be more faithfulness in my relationship. On this part, in promoting a value, it means I've got a duty to cheat, because my goal is making sure that there's much value as possible. That's promoting a value. On honoring a value means I must be true to a value, even when being true to it will make sure that there's less of it in the future. If, for example, by being honest to my wife, I'm going to make her to cheat on me because she's going to find me boring, she's going to find me clingy, right? This view insists that I must be honest on that value, even if my honesty will create less honesty in the world. That's the difference between the two attitudes of creating a value, right? But the best way to think of how to relate to the value of perfection, this thing of being a person, how must I relate to that value? How must I relate to virtue? Do I promote virtue or do I honor virtue? The suggestion that I'm making is that we must think of virtue within a framework of moral satisficing. Moral satisficing. What is moral satisficing? Moral satisficing is an idea that's suggested by Sloat, where they distinguish between satisficing and maximizing. Maximizing makes sure that there is as much of this as possible. Optimizing, right? Satisficing is doing enough, doing satisfactory, given sensitivity to human nature's limitations that are imposed by a lot of factors in the world. Just doing enough is what's expected of you, which is very, so I thought maybe to add a nice thing to this theory, think of it as having a moral satisficing logic, right? So here are two theories that I've presented to think about personhood, right? But here are some of the ways, maybe one of the ways to make these theories much clearer is to think of how they deal with objections. Let's take 3 objections. The objections from animals. How might a theory associated with Mangiti deal with animals or Ikunube? I can tell you now, those theories really struggle to deal with animals. Why they struggle to deal with animals? The struggle comes precisely because of this assumption here. Where is that assumption? The idea of if instrumental value have got capacities, then they struggle. You know why they struggle? Because they can't account for 3. They can't account for moral status. Moral status assigns intrinsic value to particular properties. So, for example, if you take Regan, if you take Singer, why their theories have got a capacity to some extent to include animals, because they say the capacity for sentience, just that capacity, the fact that you can suffer or you can enjoy gives you moral status. And that value, that capacity has got intrinsic value. So anything that can suffer has got intrinsic value, irrespective of what species it belongs to, right? But when you assign instrumental value to capacities, then you struggle to account for the moral status or for the value of things that don't even have the capacity to pursue virtue. So animals can't pursue virtue. Animals can't pursue personhood. And they don't even have the capacity, instrumental capacity for it, capacities to pursue virtue. And theories that take that approach struggle in that regard. But theories that put intrinsic value in capacities may be able to accommodate animals. Should animals have the relevant capacities, or should animals have a relevant relationship with things that have got that capacities? In that way, you may be able to accommodate animals. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here to think about animal ethics in African ethics. There's an interesting book by Kai Homstemke written in 2015. I know he has written subsequent books. It's a good place to start thinking about animal ethics in African philosophy. But I only know of that one book on animal ethics. So there's a lot of work that can be done. And the debate will center around the capacities and how to include animals. And there's a lot of literature in the West to give you clues on how to approach this particular question. But also one objection that applies to both these theories in terms of animals is that both of them, they're anthropocentric. In other words, they approach morality from perspective of putting human values at the center. But anthropocentrism itself is not a problem per se, because you can distinguish various types of anthropocentrism. So you have the strong version of anthropocentrism, you've got the weak version of anthropocentrism, and you've got what we call the prudential or the enlightened anthropocentrism. If you can be able to maneuver and argue that you've got a weak version or you've got the enlightened version, you may be able to steer away from the animal ethics objection. But I'm just trying to show you how to play around with these theories. Another serious challenge to moral theory is the question of what is called an argument from marginal cases. Marginal cases refers to human beings that are thought to be at the margins of what it means to be human. So here it refers to fetuses, refers to children can also be included in this. You can also include people who are severely mentally retarded. They are thought to be in the margins because they do not possess important capacities that we associate with normal adult human beings. Some of them temporarily, some of them permanently, right? Sometimes we have infants that are born lacking certain crucial parts of the brain, right? They are called encephalics, right? And sometimes we've got people who are severely mentally impaired, right? People will never become normal human beings. They lack important human functions. They can't be literate, they can't read, they can't write, they can't do some of the most important human functions, like going to the toilet, they have to be taken there and all of that. So you've got those kinds of human beings. They raise serious objection. And this is the structure of the objection. The structure of the objection is related to animals. And so the basic intuition behind this argument is that typically in moral philosophy, we assume that all human beings have got equal value, moral value. So in all human beings are equal and should be treated equally. But moreover, we go a step further. We also assume that all human beings have got greater moral value than all animals. People who came with the AMC argument for marginal cases have argued to say, look, why must we believe that all human beings are equal? And the standard answer is that all human beings are equal because of rationality. But he says, no, but that's not true. You've got a lot of cases of human beings that don't have rationality. But moreover, to complicate the matter, we've got animals who show greater levels of rationality than those human beings. Take a case of a normal a gorilla or a chimpanzee. They've got 17%. They've got 17% of frontal lobe capacity, right? 17% of frontal lobe capacity, as opposed to some human beings who are seriously mentally impaired who function at 1 or 2%. So in terms of rationality, it seems that this chimpanzee has got greater rationality than this marginal case. In that situation, are we comfortable to say this chimpanzee has got greater moral status than an animal? So this argument, the context was raised by people who wanted to include animal in the moral community. And the strategy was pointing to these human beings who are in the margins to make a case for animals, right? So Moral philosophers who are committed to the intuition that human beings have moral status that is equal and greater than animals have had to come with arguments to deal with that problem. I can tell you, I am aware only of 2 people in the literature in African philosophy who have attempted to deal with this question. I'm aware Therias Metz has dealt with it, and Molefe has also tried to deal with it. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this. But there's a serious objection that as we think of our theories, we must think whether they can accommodate some of the fundamental intuitions that we have, right? In the work I'm working on now, I'm suggesting another way to deal with this one. But I think for those who are interested in thinking about serious work about people who are severely mentally, this one work. I know also Etiebo works on this case of disability. I'm not sure if his interest is mental disability. It's an interesting case for us who are doing philosophy, because we think rationality, there are some things that rationality is at the heart of what it means to be human. So what happens to you if you have no rationality? But also, what is your place in morality? So one interesting way to enter this particular debate is by reading a lady called Eva Feder-Kitay. She does some brilliant work on this. I found some inspiration in how to deal with these cases from her work. And she's writing from an interesting personal point of view, but she's approaching the question from the feminist view. Why is that important for an African philosopher? Because they emphasize the importance of relationships, importance of relationships. So that's another serious objection. I can tell you now, I don't think Ikunube's theories, as Menkiti's theories, are anticipated this much. I don't know about Molefe. In some places he's anticipating this objection. I'm not sure what he has done so far deals the problem adequately. Also, Metz 2022, read that piece. He tries to deal with this. Molefe has argued that it's not successful. A 2017 paper, you can find that there. And then one last objection, and this is an objection that cuts across African ethical theories. The place of the individual and self-regarding duties. The place of the individual and self-regarding duties. So the concern here is, do African moral theories have a place to accommodate the individual and self-regarding duties? Is a place for an individual to prioritize themselves? And this is important because African ethics tends to emphasize harmony, solidarity, self-regarding duties, how to help others, and all of that, right? I mean, you can see this even in the basic dictums that capture African thought or even African moral thought. I am because we are. When Menkiti interprets this, he interprets to say it demands a moral perspective that operates from the idea of beingness with others, matches morality from just these connections, right? Or a person is a person through other persons, right? But the question that comes, what about me? Can I be the focus? Can I be the focus of morality? No, can I forgo the community and just focus on myself? What's the place of these self-regarding duties? Look, the way I'm presenting it is very simplistic, but there are very important ways to think about this question in moral philosophy. These are so-called there's a technical term for them. I forget the technical term for it, but that term deals with 3 specific concepts. The first concept is the concept of partiality and impartiality. So one way to think about self-regarding duty is to have the duty to prioritize myself over others, right? What is called agent-centered or agent-relative duties, right? What's the place of agent-relative duties where I prioritize myself even over my family, right? So that's a debate around this idea of partiality. There's another important concept here, the debate around options. The debate around options. This concept of option here is a technical concept in morality that has to deal with do our duties to others have a line or a limit? And beyond that limit, it's a scope not of the obligatory, but the scope of the permissible. In other words, if I earn 20,000, does morality require that I give away that 20,000? If you believe that morality doesn't require me to give me all the 20,000, you mean morality has got a limit, right? So 2 problems here, how to determine that limit. But for us, what is important is that limit. Do I have a limit where my duty is limited so that then I can turn on myself? Now, that's the problem of what we call options. So those 2 concepts, the concept of partiality and the concept of options, right, roughly help us to think about self-regarding duties. So these are major concerns and objections that theories of have to think about that. And look, if you read Menkiti, if you read Judge Ikunube, it's not very clear that this is something that their theories have got a space to accommodate, right? Menkiti's 1992-1997 piece, one of the things that he's fighting for, he's trying to say, look, I must have a space also to pursue things that may not be related to the community. And that particular space, how do you define it and how do you defend it theoretically? Very, very tough questions to think about. But I think I've really given you a very rough sense. So there's a value of personhood. How to make sense of this value of personhood? Think of it as moral excellence or moral perfection. But how to structure these moral perfections, at least there are two ways to think about it. There are other ways, but these are two ways. If you take Ikunube, Menkiti Ikunube, Jeche Molefe, there are two ways to think about it. You assign intrinsic capacities, human capacities, intrinsic value, or you assign them instrumental value. And that is going to help you to think about questions of moral status and all of that, right? And then you take seriously the moral frame of moral perfectionism, where the essence of what morality is about perfecting yourself, And then you think of this perfection in terms of moral satisficing, and then you think about how to navigate these objections. I think I'm going to leave it at that, and then maybe we can open for engagement.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Molefe, for your very incisive talk. I'm sure many of us found it very, very interesting. At this point, I'd like to call on anyone who has a question to simply use the hands up emoji. And I would then call on you to ask your question, and Professor Molefe would then respond to you. So if you have a question, simply raise up your hands and I'll call on you. Yes, Timenga.
Yes, thank you very much for that lecture. When I was reading the text, I was indeed also coming up with these objections of animals, of the marginal cases, because I think that the big problem is that there is so much emphasis on the concept of the human. And the concept of the human is usually, of course, defined negatively against the animal, against etc. It has also been used, of course, as a vehicle for racism. So I was wondering, can we have these insights of African ethics? Can African ethics also be employed in a way that does not rely so much on this concept of the human, whilst still encouraging flourishing community solidarity? I was wondering that.
Thank you. Look, I think for me it will be hasty. It will be hasty to run away from the concept of the human in African philosophy. I think it will be hasty because we don't want concept of what it means to be human to inherit unfortunate legacies of human conceptions from the West. What I think we need to do as people working with concepts from the margins, like that of personhood, it's really to see how we can interpret them in ways that dissociate it, what people call decolonization, from the legacies of Western anthropology. But moreover, critical also of the internal anthropology of human nature here, and think about robust ways to think about what it means to be human that can really give us a very accommodative way to do ethics. And I think like we've been doing ethics at least professionally for maybe roughly 50 years. And I think we have not really have had enough time like other communities of philosophers. So I think humbly what I would submit is that, well, let's review the history we have of Western anthropology and what it has contributed to ethics. Let's review the short history of African anthropology. I mean, also in terms of philosophical literature. Then let's survey extensively African cultures to see what resources we can get. And then from there, I think we could start saying, hey, from this attempt, we seem not to be able to come with something robust from this culture in terms of conception of human nature. Maybe we can abandon that and looking for other ways to think of ethics. So that's going to be my humble assumption. I think it's too soon for us to abandon. Maybe there might be more interesting ways to think about what it means to be human, particularly from the global south, particularly from that community, which could add something distinctive in how we think about ethics.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. Molefe. Is there any other question? All right, John.
Morning, Prof.
Good morning. Good morning.
John, I think you muted yourself.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay, I'm being heard now. So
Yes.
I actually want to, yeah, thank you, Prof. I want to find out on the issue of, if you look today, there's a debate currently as per the status of humans. Some people wake up tomorrow and say they are now females, transgender. And you rightly mentioned about some dogs, some animals like gorilla and chimpanzee who are smarter than humans. Now, do you think that realistically we could begin to redefine what a rational being should be at this age, considering the fact that there seems to be an injustice against non-human categories? It's like there's an injustice we humans have committed against animals and other beings in nature, like all these non-living things. So it's like we in the global south, we claim that those in the global north have oppressed us, and it's true. There are evidence to prove that. But don't we think that we're also suppressing the animal kingdom in the sense of using them as meats and all that? So we are discussing ethics, human conduct here. So I don't know, Prof, if we should start rethinking what a human should be, and maybe we could now add, if we are looking at certain beings, maybe we could now begin to include some other categories and clearly affirm that all these are no more, all these are humans. Like, we'll now create room for, like we see the way dogs give us good security and all that. So I think I want you to guide me in thinking through this, sir. Hello?
Oh, I'm saying I'm not full. Thanks. I'm not sure I understand the question properly, but allow me maybe to make a comment or two. I think there's a metaphysical project here that you are suggesting, and the metaphysical concept is to say, look, there's an archive in philosophy, and there's an anthropological archive, and this archive has placed rationality at the heart of what it means to be human. I mean, this project, Kant, Descartes, as far back as Aristotle, right? Rationality to be the essence, right? But also the debates also about how to account for this phenomena of rationality. How to account for it, right? And also because this phenomena, people don't object to it just as a definition of human being. People object to it also in terms of how we characterize it. There's that metaphysical project, right? Is this even the correct way to think about what it means to be human, right? So there's that. So, but also there are other ways to think about this project of what it means to be human as it relates to morality. I'll give you an example. So one of the interesting things that I'm starting to see, look at the debate between Kant and David Hume. Kant says the essence of what morality is about is rationality. Right? And Hume says, no. Hume, Hutcheson, Adam Smith, they say, no, that's not the essence of it. The essence of it is sentimentality. And for them, then, sentiments, what we might roughly call emotions, become very essential in thinking about what it means to be human. And for them, these sentiments do have a cognitive element. Right? So I think just by looking just in the Western archives, there are resources to really for us to participate at the metaphysical level and also at the level of moral reflection about what it means to be human. All I am suggesting is that this is the work that I think we should be doing as philosophers, to go back into the resources that we have, right, and think about, hey, how much we want to frame the question of what it means to be human in ways that are not problematic in relation amongst ourselves in terms of race, in terms of culture, in terms of gender or different sexes, right? In terms of how we relate also to animals, right? How might we reframe that? And in part, that to be a metaphysical project, but also in terms of it can also be a question that is moral, right? But what value, how are we going to think of the values that are central to what it means to be human in relation to morality? And then to evaluate the plausibility of these accounts would involve using the moral yardstick of inclusivity. The less inclusive a moral theory is, the less plausible it is. The more inclusive it is, the more plausible it is. So I think there's that metaphysical and moral project. And I can tell you that I'm not ambitious to think that I'll be able to do this in this short lecture, but what I can strongly suggest is that we've got a little bit of time that God has brought us. We can try.
Thank you, Professor.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any other question? Is there any other question? All right, let me check the chat box. No, okay. So I don't think there's any other question. On that note, I would like to thank Professor Molefe for giving us his talk and for responding to our questions. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this program. Like I told you all in an email earlier, our next speaker, Dr. Cornelius Ewosho, would not be available to give us a talk by 11:15. So we would reconvene at, let me see, I think 1 p.m., I believe. Yes, we will reconvene at 1 p.m. South African Standard Time, where we will listen to Dr. Bjorn Fretter speak to us on superaltern studies. And after Dr. Bjorn, we will have Dr. Joylyn Gwara, who will round up the summer school with her lecture on African feminism and womanism. So see you all at 1 p.m. And then we will finish up. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Arabia.
Thank you.
Thank you.